And before we kick off, last week we had some background stuff about renaturing and rewilding and establishing the context and stuff, but today it's very much practical about how to actually get on with it and do it in Lewes. At the moment, the health of the soil, keeping it in good heart and sort of learning to be indigenous is really, really important. And we've got an aim of rewilding or renaturing 30% of land in Lewes district by 2030. So at the end of this renaturing call, it might be that some of you want to form groups or a neighbour or team up or something to do something. And if you do, please keep us informed at Lewes, I've forgotten what we're called, Lewes Hub, or at Seaford Hub, because we can give you some kind of backup, we can share your pictures, and if necessary, we might be able to have another forum or talk further on to kind of push things along. So we'll see where it leads to. Thank you very much for coming today, and without further ado, I will hand you over to Martin Pett, who is going to talk about domestic gardens as school grounds and churchyards, and he is from the Trinity Church Lewes Care Creation team and is very experienced. So I'm going to hand him over to you now. Martin.
Hello everyone. Right, thank you. Well, good afternoon everybody. My name's Martin. And I'm from Trinity Church and their creation care team. Can we have the second slide? I'd like to talk to you this afternoon about gardening for wildlife, and in particular churchyards, school grounds and domestic gardens as havens for biodiversity. I came to Lewes about 30 years ago as head gardener at Southover Grange. I was brought up in London. I'd always had an interest in the natural world, which may seem a bit odd until you think, according to surveyed habitat information, roughly 47% of Greater London is green. 33% of London is natural habitat in open spaces, and it was open spaces like the Royal Parks and Kew Gardens that sparked my interest in nature. However, an additional 14% of London is estimated to be vegetated private gardens. All this green space indicates not only the potential for parks and open spaces as wildlife habitats in urban areas, and in this I include towns and villages, but just how much of these potential habitats are in domestic gardens, the single area we can most directly affect as individuals to increase biodiversity locally. Can I have slide 3, please? I first started gardening, particularly for wildlife, over 20 years ago, when as head gardener at London Zoo, I was tasked with creating a native wildlife garden as part of the Web of Life, a biodiversity and education centre showing that wildlife conservation isn't just about lions, tigers and elephants, but can begin in your own back garden. While planning the garden, I found this wonderful book, Creating a Wildlife Garden by Bob and Liz Gibbons. Very inspirational, especially this picture on the right of Lewes. The caption read, the potential for wildlife in gardens like this is tremendous, even in the centre of a town. So this brought wildlife gardening close to home in more ways than one. Later, I worked for the Sussex Wildlife Trust as a biodiversity officer for schools. Can we have slide 4, please? I worked as a biodiversity officer in schools in Brighton and Hove, developing their grounds for biodiversity and outdoor education. Here, I bought into the idea of the living landscape. This is a way of managing the landscape promoted by the Wildlife Trust to link wildlife hotspots that have all too often become fragmented. This fragmentation seriously reduces the ability for wildlife to move from one habitat to another. I worked on schemes such as this, turning green deserts into flower-rich grassland as havens for butterflies. Slide 5, please. At present, I volunteer at Trinity Church, Lewes, promoting creation care and eco-church, encouraging the churches at Southover, South Malling and St John Sub Castro to go greener. Churchyards are an important part of the diverse natural habitat of England, and along with the school grounds, parks and open spaces I've worked on before, can be major elements of a living landscape. But what mustn't be overlooked is domestic gardens' potential in the living landscape. Research indicates private gardens in Britain cover an area bigger than all the country's nature reserves combined, estimated at over 10 million acres. Individual gardens may be small, but they create the important green links between urban nature reserves and the wider countryside, forming vital pathways running through our countryside and towns, where restoring and creating wildlife-rich habitat stepping stones is taking place. Linking existing wildlife areas together, they create a network, a bit like a railway, weaving across the British landscape to provide large areas of brand new habitat, benefiting bees, butterflies and other wildlife. Churchyards, school grounds and private gardens can form a part of this nationwide network. Whilst this series of talks is based around the subject of renaturing and rewilding, and the idea of the living landscape sits comfortably with this, I want to look at using wildlife-friendly gardening to develop biodiversity-rich gardens and backyards as colourful, attractive and productive spaces that can be enjoyed for leisure purposes, as well as being an important part of this bigger landscape picture. Many people say to me, I garden for wildlife. I don't do anything, ha ha ha. If you want a garden that both encourages wildlife, yet is also a place you find attractive, then it requires just as much thought, planning and work as, say, a typical manicured suburban garden. However, it can still be enjoyable and bring about many benefits, not just to you, but to nature as well. There are several points I think are important with wildlife gardening, especially if you only have a small garden. Whatever features and plants you choose for your garden, they should earn their keep. Each plant should, say, provide 3 uses, for example, colourful flowers with nectar and pollen for insects, berries or seeds for birds, and perhaps giving cover and nesting sites. The garden should provide wildlife value throughout the year, and as well as attracting birds, butterflies, small mammals and pollinators, and be a part of this wider landscape, the garden should be an attractive outdoor space to enjoy leisure time. This has certainly been important during lockdown. We also need to have a change of mindset concerning weeds. As often said, a weed is only a plant growing in the wrong place. If you decide that these plants are not in the wrong place and can be worked with, then they're no longer weeds. People will tell you that the best way to it is best to stick with native species of plants. I agree with this to a point. However, I am not averse to using introduced non-natives or cultivars if they serve a purpose, providing they're not harmful invasive plants. Wildlife gardening is a huge topic, so I'll just mention some of my own personal favourite features that are mostly basic points that will help if you're starting your own wildlife haven. Can I slide 6, please? I'll start with habitats as homes, and in particular ponds and compost heaps. I would suggest that ponds and compost heaps are the 2 most important habitats in any wildlife garden, providing home for many species. I don't want to go into these in too much detail, as they warrant talks of their own. but only that ponds can be of any size. The first wildlife pond I ever built was in a plastic baby's bath sunk into the ground. I've also seen useful wildlife ponds created from upturned dustbin lids. As well as giving a habitat for pond life, they provide a source of water for birds to drink and bathe in. It's important to have a shallow end or beach area so that any animals that fall in can get out easily. Compost heaps and leaf mould piles are the beating heart of any garden, providing ways of recycling green material, returning nutrients to the soil, improving soil structure, and are a first step towards organic chemical-free gardening. Most importantly, in a wildlife garden, they can provide homes for small mammals, including hedgehogs, for reptiles such as slowworms, and of course a whole range of invertebrates that play a part in breaking down the green waste and then in turn provide food for other species. Compost heaps ought to be open fronted to allow access, and when you're using the compost, do go careful. Check that there aren't any hedgehogs in the pile before thrusting a fork into it. Whilst mentioning hedgehogs, allow gaps at the bottom of hedges and fences so they can move between gardens. Can we look at slide 7 now, please? Okay, there's right. Right, this isn't the herb one I was expecting, but we'll go on to this one first. Herb gardens, botanically a herb is a seed producing annual, biennial or perennial that does not develop persistent woody tissue, but dies down at the end of the growing season. We tend though to refer to a herb as a plant with leaves, seeds or flowers used for flavouring food, medicine or perfume, which is the purpose of a herb garden in this definition I'll use. I often suggested planting herb gardens in schools near the front entrance as they are attractive, colourful and can be used in cooking while being wildlife friendly. The herb garden in the picture is the medieval herb garden at Lewes Priory with a wide range of herbs that would have been used for many different purposes. The range of different flower types, flowering times are excellent for pollinators throughout the year. The herb gardens can be informal like this one, or be designed more formally with straight lines, low hedges, and geometric beds. Many herbs can be grown in tubs and troughs, so are very useful for small gardens or balconies. The top 10 wildlife-friendly herbs are rosemary, caraway, hyssop, English lavender, my favourite because it's such a flexible plant for different uses, common sage, wild thyme, fennel, chives, common mint, and wild marjoram. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, so right, flower-rich lawns or flowery lawns. I've referred to this feature as a flowery lawn rather than a meadow, as creating a meadow requires a lot of work to reduce the fertility of the soil first. With a flowery lawn, you can just let what you've got grow. It's a good place to start in your wildlife garden, as you only need to allow the grass to grow. Most lawns will already have a resident flora, including daisies, dandelions, self-heal and yarrow. And you could allow the whole lawn to grow, or maybe just a few patches here and there. And by cutting paths through the grass, will make it look as though the area is managed, not just overgrown. So cutting the grass depends on what type of lawn you want to consider. Spring flowery lawn could include bulbs such as snowdrops, daffodils and crocus, great for pollinating insects early in the year, can be left until late June before mowing down, and then kept cut to simulate traditional grazing after the initial hay cut, or can be left to grow to get another modest flush of flowers with a final cut in mid to late September. Summer flowery lawns can either be left uncut until a single mow in mid to late September, or keep cut until June, especially if there is a lot of growth, and cut again which is always quite amusing in a churchyard. But anyway, a rotary mower with the blades raised high will do. Allow the clippings to dry a little so the seeds can disperse before breaking off to reduce soil fertility. Managing the grass at Southover Churchyard this way, we now have many colourful flowers such as spotted orchids, oxeye daisy, and the plants that are here, lady's bed straw and majora. Right, next slide, please. Now we go on to hedges and hedgerows. Hedgerows are a vital feature of the countryside, forming corridors between habitats. They can be adapted for wildlife gardens, and one way to do this is with a mixed deciduous edible hedge, which offers huge value to wildlife. As well as providing shelter, they bear flowers for pollinators, leaves for caterpillars, and wind-filled fruit and nuts for birds and small mammals. What's more, by growing the widest range of plants possible, you will attract the widest range of insects. Plenty of hedging plants produce edible berries and nuts, adding interest and purpose to your boundary. By growing a mixture of different plants, you can reap the rewards of cobnuts, sloes, and plums and crabapple in the autumn that can be used to make jams, jellies, and syrups, amongst other things. Most of the plants that can be used are native to Europe, many to the UK, most flowering in spring with autumn harvest and colour. They're made up of a combination of shrubs, rambling plants, and small trees. An edible mixed native hedge can be maintained at any height from 120 centimetres up to several metres. They are best trimmed once a year, anytime from August, but ideally in winter, taking care to leave some of the persistent berries and fruits for the birds. The main choices for edible hedges include blackthorn, which gives structure to the hedge, suckering freely. You can enjoy the blossom, give sloes for gin or whatever takes your fancy. Alternatively, leave them for the birds. Hazel also gives structure to the hedge. The nuts are a boon for small mammals and cooks. Cherry plum flowers in February, a great early forage for bees. Fruit's not terribly tasty, but the birds like it. Then dog rose, the haws can be used in many hedgerow recipes. And one interesting one, cornelian cherry or cornus mass, an abundance of small yellow flowers in February, followed by red edible cherry-like fruits that can make highly nutritious jellies and compote. Foliage turns red-purple in the autumn. Then there's the Blackberry Emperor or bramble, the most foraged hedgerow plant. In a sunny position, it is one of the absolute best wildlife plants, producing marvellous nectar flowers, very edible fruits, and leaves eaten by moths. Then there's Buddleia, the butterfly bush, undoubtedly the best means of attracting butterflies. I've seen honey on mine. Sorry. It can be a bit straggly, but if you plant several bushes, prune some earlier in the spring and some later, leave one unpruned, you extend the flowering season. And also by cutting off the flowers as they fade, lateral branches will carry on producing flowers. Ivy is probably one of the best all-purpose wildlife plants. An attractive plant if allowed to clamber freely, though not over flint walls, as it can damage them. A larval food for the holly blue butterfly, excellent autumn nectar source, attracting late season butterflies. The black winter berries provide food for birds. It makes excellent roosting and nesting sites and good hibernation places for butterflies, etc. Then we have stinging nettles. Everybody sort of should have a patch of nettles. They're the caterpillar food for commas, small tortoiseshells, peacocks, and red animals. 4 of the commonest and most welcome garden visitors. Nettles can be grown as you would do with mints in pots sunk in the ground so they don't get out of hand. They're useful as a vegetable, managed by cutting back at various times through the summer to regrow whilst leaving others uncut. Then there's roadside weeds such as teasel. They provide colourful flowers and the seeds are a favourite of goldfinches. Now I'll go on to the subject I'm most often asked about, Can we have slide 11, please? When I started my apprenticeship in gardening, one of the things we learned was how to create a border using hardy annuals. It taught techniques of cultivation, design, sowing, etc. But working for local authorities, hardy annuals were seldom used as they didn't fit in with the rest of the horticultural calendar. However, lately, with an interest in flowers to attract pollinators and the need for easy gardening during lockdown, they have had something of a resurgence. Those of you who saw the colourful displays at Southover Grange last summer will know what I mean. Billed as wildflowers, they were actually hardy annuals, as there were quite a number of non-native flowers present. Although it did include cornfield annuals, which I think are what most people think of when wildflowers come to mind. Things like field poppy, cornflower, corncockle and corn marigold. They're all flowers of disturbed ground, meaning the soil needs to be turned every year, as with ploughing cornfields. Best treated as hardy annuals and sown in borders, though cereals such as oats or barley could also be sown if you wanted the cornfield effect. So what are hardy annuals? Well, they're plants that go through their entire life cycle in one season, and which can be sown outside in the open garden during spring where it is to flower. It's possible to sow half-hardy annuals as well as French and African marigolds or cosmos, though they will flower later than the usual bedding. It's giving a good source of late-season pollen and nectar for insects. If you sow them in drifts, it can give a cottage garden appearance and is perhaps the easiest and cheapest way of creating a wildflower border or flower border for pollinating insects. Choose plants where possible that have single flowers, as they provide a more accessible access of nectar. Some annuals for a colourful display useful for pollinators include alyssum, poached egg flower, limnanthus, sunflowers, cosmos, night-scented stock, which are good for moths, and pot marigolds. You can find a comprehensive list of plants for pollinators on the RHS website. Can I have slide 12, please? And can we go on to the next one, I think? There should be another slide. Right, anyway, this has been a quick run through of my favourite ways of gardening for wildlife, to give a colourful and productive garden that will also turn your patch into a haven for biodiversity and form part of the living landscape. I hope that this has given you a few ideas. I'd be happy to take any questions now. The final slide should have been one with a list of resources of places that I've mentioned, like the bee lines and things like that, but I'm sure they could be sent on to people if needed. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. Wow, that's loads of information. So
things that I've said, I said like that in the talk, various different, if you have a basis of things like hazel and blackthorn sloes, then that'll probably take a few of them away. You might like sort of something like brambles and dog rose in amongst it as well, which will be quite useful. However, sometimes I know the organisations, local authorities and whatever running the allotments would not be all that happy with you having that sort of thing on there. Having been an allotment officer before, I do know that. So yeah, just any range of nut and berry producing shrubs would be useful.
okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, Martin. And I hope you can see the chat. I know you're on your phone. I hope you can see
right, the chat. There we are, yes.
Loads of messages saying that a fantastic talk. So thank you. Dinah, would you like to ask about hedgehogs? Dinah Morgan, you're still mute. Yeah.
I was pleased.
Go on, Martin. Sorry.
I was pleased to see that message just come up that Lewes encourages things like brambles and things like that. That's quite good to know.
Yeah.
But that's what the sort of thing I was saying is that if it looks managed, then that's the way to get through things, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. I don't think oh, Tasha is okay. Tasha, rather than read all your questions, would you like to ask Martin that one? Thanks.
Yes, hello. So I've been increasing my wildflower content in my really small garden. It's about 3 by 9 meters. And that's in a mixture of making a little designated bed for wildflowers, but also not really cutting my lawn, only doing it once or twice a year and letting things grow within that. But I'm sort of struggling because I've got some cultivated and foreign plants and native ones, which like poor soil. So have you got any tips on how I manage soil fertility? We're trying to keep it weak for some and well nourished for other. I'm sort of can't quite get my head around combining the two.
Right. I mean, to reduce the fertility within the soil, the first thing is that when you do cut the grass, is to make sure that you rake the grass off, so that leave it for a couple of days so that it dries out first, and then so the seeds disperse, and then make sure that's raked off, so that eventually will help reduce the soil fertility. The other thing you could do is you could try sowing a plant called yellow rattle. Yellow rattle is a semi-parasitic plant that takes some of the energy away from the coarse grasses and helps to reduce allow more space for wildlife plants. So that works very well in the churchyards at Southover and wildlife grassland.
So I'm growing some yellow rattle for the first time as plug plants this year. So I'm hoping that's going to be helpful. Yeah, I've already got that on my radar. I suppose
it does spread well as well.
I think my trickiness is around having them things that need feeding and things that don't want to be fed sort of in the same space. There's a conflict there.
Right, that's a bit difficult. I mean, if you're having mostly wildflowers, then of course that's not going to need feeding. This was one of the reasons why I said about putting plants, having particular borders for your hardy annuals and even for the cornflower plants. Then, so that would be better that they're not actually in the same vicinity. Then you can then treat an area one way and another area a different way. It is very difficult trying to feed plants, and unless of course you've got them in pots or containers.
I've got a whole mixture everywhere, really. So
well, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds really good. I like that sort of thing. I like the beds at Southover Grange last year because it was a mixture of all sorts of different things.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thanks, Martin. I think we've got time for one more question from Dinah, and then we're going to move on to the next person. Dinah, do you want to ask Martin?
Martin, yeah, I've got a wealth of slugs and snails in the garden, but I never see a thrush or a hedgehog. Have you got any tips? I know you said to cut a hole at the bottom of the fence for hedgehogs so that they can get through, but is there anything else that they like to eat or any way of attracting?
I mean, I'm not really an expert on sort of hedgehogs and things like that, but I think that it's probably only worth doing something if you think you've actually seen hedgehogs in here. But what you could do is you can get butterfly homes, but the idea of a leaf pile or something like that provides possible hibernation areas for hedgehogs is quite good. You could put out food for hedgehogs. I've believe they usually say something like cat food or something like that is best, although you can buy proper hedgehog food from the garden centres and things like that. Yes, so that's one way of trying to encourage things. I haven't seen very many thrushes about either, so that's a little bit of a worry, I think.
Thank
yeah,
you.
so
yeah, Wendy was offering to give us some more information on hedgehogs.
Hi everybody, sorry I've muted myself and also unvideoed myself because I was cooking and painting at the same time as listening. Anyway, I live in Cooksbridge. I can give various bits of information to those interested later on hedgehogs. I currently, hopefully with this weather, have at least 4 in my garden hibernating. What you must have, or as Martin said, you know, you need to know whether you've got a hedgehog around. But even before that, you need to make your garden accessible. And that is creating a hedgehog highway. And you need a space about the size of a CD-ROM at the bottom of your hedge or fence, and ideally a couple of them, so that they can pass through to other people. You also want to, I would make sure you have water available. Make sure you have somewhere they can stay or create a home. And you can either buy a hedgehog house, but they can be quite expensive if you don't actually have any hedgehogs. I have my 3 that are living in the garden at the moment. I just cut a CD side in an upturned old polystyrene fish box, and then use that, and you can make all sorts of things, or you can just make a leaf pile that's got a hole in it. So I wouldn't spend a fortune on anything until you absolutely know you have one, and guaranteed anyway, if you almost the first time you buy a hedgehog house, you will find that they don't live in it and they live somewhere else. How to encourage them to come in more is I would suggest, is give them food. And as Martin says, you can use cat or dog food, ideally meaty, but the problem with that is the cats and dogs will also eat it. So I would buy a little bit of hedgehog food, but beware, your blackbirds will also love that. They're currently eating mine. If you get foxes in your garden, they'll also eat it. So you can make, I'm just walking out into my garden to see, there's one there, somebody's living in there. I might lose you, but I've got something else up here too.
Is 2 hours.
And various other ones. You can get hedgehog food from Ark Wildlife, and if you and bird food from them as well. And if you sign up for an account with them, and you can ask them to donate to RAS, Wildlife Rescue Ambulance Service. Every purchase you make, they will donate. If you do get hedgehogs in your garden, you then need to be vigilant and watch if they're out in the day and things like that, because you do get quite a lot of parasite burden and fly blows, so you need to know where to take them. And there's lots of information if you Google it. So that's, sorry, quite a lot, but and also, yes, somebody's put set up a camera, exactly, because I have only a £50 from Amazon wildlife camera, and I have some absolutely brilliant hedgehogs.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. That's fantastic. Thanks very much for adding that.
If you want any more information, contact me, but there's loads of other people as well. Okay, and Hedgehog Street, somebody else has said.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, bye.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. I'd like to introduce Dinah Pryor from Seaford Environmental Alliance, who's going to talk about, no, I wouldn't. I'd like to introduce Leslie, sorry, I apologise. I'd like to introduce Leslie Healy from Common Cause next. Thank you. That's great. You're still muted, Leslie.
I do beg your pardon. That's really rubbish. Okay, so I've been invited to talk about nature-friendly food gardening, and just to let you know, I'm a director of Common Cause, and I coordinate the Lewes community allotment up at Highdown allotments. And these two pictures, Jane, actually your left, is a full summer picture, and maybe hopefully we'll be looking forward to that a bit more. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to turn off my camera because as usual, I have connection problems, and I'm hoping that will sort it out. Okay. Right. So the first question you might ask is, well, why bother? Except that you're all here, so I know you'll know why you're bothering. It's extremely fun and rewarding to grow your own food. And it's also, and be warned, if you've never tried it, it's also frustrating, infuriating, swear-making, disappointing. But you know, when you get to eat something that you yourself has grown, it is just amazing. But we do need to not just run roughshod over the wildlife. The reasons for growing are things like, you know, food security. Lots of people are very anxious about Brexit. We've got a lot of, well, obviously it's climate hubs, so you know. But as we grow our own food in, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you're good at the moment, Leslie.
Right. So because we're living through climate change, and that means lots of long-term change as well as extremes, we do need to develop resilience. And one way of doing that for food production is to grow your own food, and then you and your crops will start to develop with the climate. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to stop or halt climate change, but it does make us more resilient to the change. Obviously, lots of anxiety around Brexit. It has been a great comfort, to be honest, to be able to go up to the allotment and pick our own food, even in the depths of winter. That's been great. And actually with lockdown, even better, because, you know, if we've been shielding or whatever, you don't need to be reliant on going to the shop for absolutely everything. But we do need wildlife to help us to produce the best food we can. And wildlife needs us not to just turn everything we're growing food on into a desert. So we all know what happened in the 70s when the hedges and the trees were taken out. And that has become an extremely difficult environment for wildlife. But it also has meant an explosion in chemical use in particular. So if you don't want to do that, and none of us should want to do that, then you need to learn how to work with wildlife to get the best possible. And I will just say, you know, it's been a really difficult year. Everyone knows that. But everybody wanted to be in their gardens if they had one, or to be in nature if they could get there. And there has been a huge increase in food growing. So it's a great way to do and to learn something new and to get in amongst what else is happening in the world, to see birds, again, an explosion in popularity. What I would really like to do is to feel that we're not going to lose that once we've, hopefully lost the pandemic. So the core principles are so simple. Produce food and produce as much food as you can, but do it kindly. So use an organic ethos, so no pesticides. Pesticides is a group word including herbicides, in case anyone asks. So nothing that will kill animals, and particularly invertebrates, nothing no, don't do the easy thing and spray everything with Roundup. There are other ways to get rid of the things you don't want and encourage the things you do. Preserve and enhance the soil structure and the fertility, and find ways to help wildlife to flourish. And that's whether you've got a windowsill or just a pot of herbs, as Martin was discussing, or you actually have a small holding. Actually encouraging and allowing wildlife to flourish where you are gardening is going to do you a huge amount of good. It's really important for me to say that you should grow what suits the soil. Don't try and introduce loads of peat because you don't want to be gardening on chalk. You are gardening on chalk, live with it. Brassicas love chalk. So if you love a brassica, be happy to garden here. But don't, I do have a blueberry, but it's in a pot. I'm never going to be able to, and I'm never going to want to grow another one, because to start that one, I had to buy a load of ericaceous compost. Now that blueberry is 12 years old, but do check compost bags, because even though they appear to be peat-free, when you really look, and they all have on them now how much added peat they've got, when you do look, it's very difficult to buy completely peat-free compost unless it says peat-free. And the final point I want to make is that we should be growing something that is seasonal, i.e. let's live with our seasons, and plan to grow something that suits every season, and grow things that lots of varieties of stuff, lots of different things. It's actually very good for us, but it's also very good for nature, because again, we don't want a green desert any more than a green desert of one crop. So just to think about how to do some of that. So let's think about organic and how we manage to be organic in a difficult, let's face it, challenging growing environment wherever you are. And your keywords really here are barriers, diversions, deterrents, and killers. And some of the examples here are raised beds that we have at the allotment. We're so lucky to have them. And that was put in as part of the whole project of setting up the Common Cause allotment. But these in the middle here, I hope you can see my pointer, are actually domestic compost bins that are cut in half and remade into raised beds. So they don't cost nothing, but I have to say that in my front garden, anyone who knows me knows that I've got a pile of pallets which have been very freely available, and they will be made into more raised beds, and very simply. Those over the top, because growing in them are brassicas that are the white butterfly's favourite food. So a barrier that stops the butterflies getting in, laying their eggs. The caterpillars will completely skeletalize any brassica you've got. Well worth it, and it means you don't have to spray at all. A little bit of fleece will put off lots of mice. You saw that lovely sparrow hopping around Gemma's garden and picking out green things. Well, that's what the birds will do on your new seedlings that are just coming up. They will eat the lot in spring. They are always looking for a bit of greenery in spring. So put a bit of fleece over your seedlings just to stop that happening. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to be scaring off the birds. Yellow raspberries or any yellow fruits are invisible to most birds. They don't taste quite the same as red raspberries, but nevertheless, that's a really good diversion or a deterrent. And I've got yellow raspberries or gold raspberries at the back, and they're never eaten. If you put down weed suppressant, well, you won't get weeds. It's as simple as that. So when you've got an empty bed, cover it, exclude the light. And it doesn't matter how you do that. There are lots of ways to do it, and I'll show you a couple more later. If you exclude the light, nothing will grow. And if you exclude it for long enough, then you will end up with weed-free patch, and then you can start to keep on top of it. And that's the way to clear ground. I will just say, do not dig. It's really bad for you, and it certainly is terribly bad for the soil. Down here at the bottom of the screen, you've got Tagetes, which are the African ones that you tend to grow in greenhouses, and they are attractive to some pests and deter other pests. So the smell actually deters aphids, and they really do work, and they're very commonly grown in greenhouses where you've got tomatoes. But next door, look at that lovely open plant, and that's a native calendula. Equally, well, not quite, maybe not quite as good, but much better for pollinators to have these lovely open blooms, as Martin was saying. And we have these growing all over the allotment, and I've got them growing all over my garden now. And they're very, very easy to control. So if you think they're getting out of hand, pulling them up and then, or digging them up and just planting them somewhere else. And the last thing I've got showing on this slide is a lettuce. And you might think, why? Well, that's a sacrificial lettuce. So if you put a lettuce at the end of a crop that you don't want to be eaten by slugs, or you put lettuce leaves down every night, then most of your crop will stay uneaten, and the slugs will go to the thing they reach first, and the snails. And it's not perfect, but it is an awful lot better than putting down slug bait. We've just been talking about how we want hedgehogs. Putting down slug bait is a great way not to have them. And then my favorite slide, killers. So let's start with the hedgehog. Everybody knows they are fantastic at hoovering up any mollusks going. But we have ladybirds. That's actually the black fly on our broad beans up at the allotment, sadly. But next door, I don't know if people have seen them before, but that little bug eating aphids, that is a ladybird larva. Now, if you've never seen one before, they are extraordinary things. They look nothing like the parents, but they have the most voracious appetite. They're amazing. Next door to that is a robin, which really just is indicative of any bird. And they are obviously very hungry any time in the year, but they do particularly love caterpillars in the spring, and they feed those to their brood. Everyone who's watched Spring Watch will have seen that. And over in this corner here is a toad, one of my favorite animals. And you will see what it's sitting on. It's sitting on weed suppressant, and it's actually was found under the weed suppressant that had been put down elsewhere in the allotment. So if you're very lucky, put down weed suppressant and you'll find a toad underneath tidying out the slugs. We also here have slow worms. They love a compost heap, absolutely love a compost heap, and they will pretty much hoover up anything that's living in a compost heap. But they will also venture out in the heat of the day mostly, and they love a small slug. They love, beetles. They love caterpillar. Really, they're very omnivorous in terms of, well, they're not. They eat meat. The same with dragonflies. Everyone's have probably seen dragonflies catching flying insects. Amazingly good for your garden pests. Wasps, not only good pollinators, but also good predators on aphids and other things. Same with hoverflies. And here you see a little parasitic, a tiny little parasitic wasp. You can see how tiny it is because it's injecting its egg into an aphid. So it's really tiny. And that aphid will then grow the new wasp and die itself and stop UK species. And over on the left, you'll be wondering why I've put a plant in it with killers. And that's because that's a plant called Mexican Tagetes. So it's actually Tagetes minuta, and it's we planted that for the first time on the allotment this, or sown it. It's actually an annual, and it grows very tall. You can't see there, but I mean it must be 2.5 to 3 feet tall, and it smells amazing. You can make tea with the leaves, and the flowers are edible, and it kills weeds. So we put it down as a test to see if it would stop the couch grass, and it has, and it is very well known for stopping and killing perennial weeds off. So I do commend that to you. So just thinking now about not digging and preserving and enhancing the soil structure. So compost bins, absolutely core to the allotment, to the garden, to anywhere that you're growing food. Absolutely essential, and also perfect for wildlife. So really get varied bins so that you can give lots of different wildlife chances to live in different bins. So that's our open fronted at the top. Sorry, that's gone. At the top right hand side, I must stop tapping my screen, are our open fronted compost bins at the allotment, which do a fine job and are home to lots of, well, one of these days I will actually look at the surface and there'll be an adder on there. And I really, really hope that happens, and it is possible, you never know. The one in the middle is called a green Joanna, and that is a more closed system. It has holes at the bottom to allow worms and other very small creatures in and out. And the one on the left-hand side is your very basic beehive-shaped compost bin. And when you lift the lid of that compost bin, that's the one you're likely to find slow worms in, because it gets really hot, which is great for the compost, and the slow worms absolutely love it. So take all of your green waste and compost it. The green Joanna in the middle is meant to take meat and other cooked food without risking rats. My own experience is that rats will eat through it, so I still wouldn't myself. On the next slide with the pole sticking up, that is a bracken mulch that members of the allotment collected painfully, I think, in the end, from Chailey. Obviously, bracken dies down in the winter, so they cut it, brought it to the allotment, and now we're trying it out as a mulch on our vegetable areas. So this is Sabinary. Next door is a green manure called Phacelia, and below and next door to that is another green manure called red clover or scarlet clover in before they flower. Once they flower, what they do is, sorry, I should say, what they actually do is they fix nitrogen in the soil. So they actually act as a manure in place. You don't have to cut it and decompose it to be a manure. They're already fertilizing the soil. But if you do let them flower, then the flowers will start to use up that goodness. On the right on the right hand side is comfrey. This one's the tall Russian comfrey. Comfrey is an amazingly good fertilizer. Cut it and put it into your compost, it really enhances it. Cut it and put it into water and let it soak, then you are making a liquid fertilizer for your plants. A word of warning, it absolutely stinks. On the bottom, in the middle, that's actually what my garden looks at the moment. That's my vegetable patch. I know it looks very green, and it's very green because quite a few years ago my neighbour gave me a cerinthe plant, or a cerinthe, and it's the most amazing thing. It's only an annual, but it self-seeds so freely, and so that now covers my vegetable pots all winter. So it crowds out all the other weeds, and then in the summer it's terribly easy just to move back and pull out what I don't want, so I have somewhere to plant my veg without digging. And over here, right on the right hand bottom corner, that's actually called a Lasagna bed, and it's a way of, it's actually quite an elaborate structure, but it has underneath it has green mass, the stuff that you'd normally put in your compost bin, then lots of cardboard, then soil, and then other green mass. and you allow that to compost all the way through in winter. And you can even plant through it, and that's a really great way to restore the nutrition of your soil without doing anything nuts like going and buying fertilizers. Please don't do that. Oh yes, and the horse. Manure is wonderful stuff, but please don't put it on fresh. Wait till it's really pretty much like soil itself. So it shouldn't smell except of lovely sort of earthy stuff, and it shouldn't be slimy, but it will be absolutely chocker full of worms. Worms love the stuff, and if you can get it organically, even better, because then you're not putting any weird stuff onto your soil. So positively allowing and encouraging wildlife to thrive and to flourish. Feed it. Feed the things that you want. So somebody has very recently said to me, if you look after the invertebrates, the rest of nature will look after itself. Well, you need to look after invertebrates by planting things that they can eat and they can live in, they can mate on, they can lay their eggs on. You need to look after them with plants mainly. So at the top row are pollinator perfect plants. The first one is a bank in my garden, which is full of comfrey and geraniums, and that photograph was taken on the 2nd of April last year. The one in the middle is that Cerinthe that I showed you a photograph of, and that photograph was taken in April last year, and it's a massive flowers. This photograph of Rosemary I took last week in all that filthy cold, and I can't see it because I'm colourblind, but I think in there is a flower. And similarly with the gorse, I took that photograph last week. Gorse flowers all year, and they flower because there will be queen bumblebees coming out to feed, and they need nectar. And of course, these plants also need the help of insects to produce their own seeds. So the way they do that is by providing flowers all year. But to have those in your plot or on the allotment or whatever, maybe you don't want gorse in your garden, is a perfect way of feeding and looking after your invertebrates. We let ragwort grow on the allotment, and we welcome it because then you get these fantastic cinnabar moths and they're lovely, lovely caterpillars. And they eat the ragwort down, and then we get more of these fabulously beautiful moths. You don't normally get a moth and a caterpillar together. That's why I took that photograph. I think Martin mentioned chives when we're talking about herbs, and there you go, proof positive. There's a bunch of chives or a flower of chives covered in bees. And over to the right hand side is the lovely borage, a very easy annual to grow and also very, very attractive to any flying pollinator. On the left hand side is a mullein flower, and in the middle of it, hopefully you can see the Mullein Caterpillar. Some of these animals are very species specific. So the mullein moth and the cinnabar moth, these are their only food plants. And if you don't provide them, they disappear. If you get teasels, leave them for the winter, and the goldfinches will come and finish up the seed for you. Another really good pollinator friendly and early pollen giving plant is this Centaurea, and this is Centaurea montana. And I don't know if you can see on the left hand side, it's already got buds, and that was taken last week. That picture with its flowers, that was taken in early March last year. Perfect for early pollinators. And that is a sunflower head. So don't dig up or pull up your sunflowers, leave them, and the birds will love those seeds. And then thinking about how to give them somewhere to live and to encourage them to move in. Think about how to make what you do have more than one purpose. Martin talked about that for flowers. And I want you to think about it for structures. So here you go. This is a willow fence, which surrounds one of the borders at the allotment. It does actually now need to be remade, but it provides lots and lots of little crevices for the pollinators and the other invertebrates on the allotment. And we also have around the allotments, and I wish I could say the same for my garden, but I'm not as good on that. We have little hedges for our patches made from lemon balm and curry plants and thyme and other sort of herbs. So we also have on the top right hand side, you'll see it in flower, which frankly is far more interesting than looking at the dead stuff. We also grow quite a lot of things in tires, and you'll see, I mean, that's the winter picture, was a little bit earlier than last week. You'll see how perfect they are, because invertebrates and other small animals can get inside, and then the tire actually provides cover for them. And we know we have a mouse living in one of them. And leave the seed heads. I think Martin's already said this. This is sedum. These are various different, these are salvias. These are grass heads. Leave them, because inside many of those little spots will be insects overwintering, or eggs overwintering, or cocoons overwintering. So don't cut stuff back, don't be tidy, and just leave things until early spring. Give everything a chance to hatch out or move on before you start hacking things around. And the extra help, Martin's already spoken about ponds, plenty of cover around ponds. That pond there is only about 1 metre square. It doesn't need to be big. It is about...
I was come and listen to this.
Sorry. It is about sort of 9 or 10 inches deep. And actually we've got 3 ponds. That's another one, and that's got a safety structure over it. In case any person, any child falls in it and damages it. And it also obviously provides a leg hold for the hedgehogs that might wander across it, and we wish they would. We have a hedgehog house, and hedgehog houses and piles of leaves are the perfect way to encourage them. But also under there could easily be overwintering snakes, overwintering spiders, mice, rats. And by the way, I'm not an advocate of killing rats. They all have their place. On this tire, which we leave specifically by the pond, proof positive that if you have a tire and it heats up, you will get lizards. And if you've never seen a lizard and you live in Lewes, then you just need to be quiet for longer and provide them with a surface that heats up. And there are lizards all over Lewes. It's just that you need to be, you just need to be lucky really to see them. See, amongst the duckweed, that's a froglet. And we're hoping we're going to get some more of those this year. The allotment, by the way, is working with a charity called Frog Life, and they're going to help us do better with our ponds. This is the cover that we provide near the pond. And that cover means that anything can come and go as it needs without being in the open. And that's an insect house. That's in my garden, so it's a modest one. And at the allotment, we've got a much better one. And one of these days, I will have the energy and the time to make myself a better one. But they genuinely do work. I know that they're a bit of a sort of, almost a cliche. But I have a friend who has an insect house, and every cell, you can see that every cell is occupied. I haven't done quite so well. These are all occupied, but the holes above aren't. Oh, and not only tires, but if you put down a roof tile or a metal sheet, a bit of corrugation, then you will also attract slow worms and grass snakes to live underneath them, or to stay underneath them to warm up. I will just say, pretty much what other people have been saying, if you are going to encourage wildlife, please look after it. And here's some examples. This is a hedgehog ramp to allow hedgies out of ponds. It's a simple structure. They just need to be, they're good swimmers. They just need to be able to reach something they can clamber up. This lovely display of slow worms is in, but I empty them very gradually and very gently. And quite often what will happen is I'll start at the top and there'll be slow worms and they will gradually just run away from me. Oh, sorry, legless lizards. And then right at the bottom, I'll lift the compost bin and they'll shoot out the side. And they say slow worms, but actually they're really quick. So just be careful and thoughtful. This little mite, this is a baby lizard, and it was in one of the compost bins. So easy to kill. Just be watchful and be careful. In here, I don't know if you can see it, that's a frog. A small frog. It got into my watering can because it was hot and it had water in it, and it got wedged in the spout. And I'm grateful to say it did survive. But be careful, leave things on their side is my advice. Don't leave a receptacle in the garden that something can climb into and get stuck in and not able to get out of. On the allotment, I don't have any netting in the garden at the moment, but on the allotment, we make sure that there is a gap under every net, because the little birds over the winter come and go through those gaps, and they tidy up any bugs, they help themselves to seeds, they help themselves to greenery. It's only the pigeons that we don't want eating our brassicas. The little birds aren't interested. And here we have a toad, and that's lurking by the compost bin. Again, watch for toads. They're quiet things, they're not particularly big, and they're very easy to hurt. So a final word really on growing what suits the soil, and growing seasonally and plenty of variety. It is good for us, but it's also good for our wildlife. All of these photographs were taken between early November, which was the squash harvest, all the way through to last week. In fact, pretty much everything else was taken in the last 2 or 3 weeks. That's our parsnip harvest. That was, well, 2 weeks before Christmas, when we had a ritual harvest of our lovely frost-bitten parsnips. And obviously that spinach, that is what the spinach looks like just before the frost came. Perfect. Curly kale, that is landcress actually, and some rocket, and it's delicious. Red kale, that's the landcress. Sorry, I keep giving you a preview of the robin. And that's chard. There really is no need to grow stuff that isn't in season, but birds and different insects, different invertebrates will love each of these environments and each of these different sorts of soil type and growing sort of the plant habit. And you're giving everything a different chance to have a life. And finally, my favorite picture, because that's my hand, that's the robin that lives at the allotment, or it's one of them actually. And I don't know any joy better than hand feeding a robin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Wow, Leslie, that looks just amazing.
Dinah.
Stuff that's growing and beautiful. Right, we're running a little bit over, so
Sorry,
we're probably no, it was fantastic. So we're gonna maybe just have one question and then move on, so that Seaford Environmental Alliance have a little bit of time. And I don't know, maybe we need to schedule another session really to have some interesting discussions and link ups and questions at some point. So Linda had the first question about some fruit trees in her garden. So I think we're just going to do that for the moment, and then maybe we'll have a chance another time to come back to some more. Linda.
Thank you. Great talk, Leslie. Thank you very much. I've been trying for years to find a way of controlling the codling moth in my trees. I have lots of fruit trees, and they all are infested with codling moths. apples, pears, plums, you know, damsons, the whole lot. Every year, about, I don't know, 70% of the fruit is just full of maggots. It's just not very encouraging, and I've never really found a good organic way of controlling them, given that I don't want to, you know, I don't want to eradicate other insects at the same time because they're in such decline.
Right, so you have my sympathy, and I have the same problem. Apples and pears, it's codling moth. Plum and damson, it's plum moth. I mean, you might as well just say the same thing. It's exactly the same problem. You can get, and I would advocate the use of, the sorts of traps with a lure in it, which is a pheromone lure, and it brings the males onto a very sticky pad. I'm afraid that every time I catch a spider as well, I'm mortified, but it does really work. And if you've got a very, very bad infestation, it's well worth it. Actually, they're meant to be indicators. So what they say in the instructions you'll see is if you've got more than so many moths, time to spray. But don't do that. Just get more traps. And eventually, I have got to the point now where I've probably, I shouldn't say this because we all know that what will happen is I'll say it, and then this coming season, 3/4 of my harvest will be infested. But last year, 3/4 of it wasn't. So I know. And that's all you can do if you don't want to spray. And actually, spraying has got very limited value. Even orchard farmers will tell you it's the actual little maggots are laid above the fruit, and then they crawl into the fruit when they're tiny. And you only have about 3 days to spray them, to kill them. So really, most sprays are put on, if people are using sprays, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get it at the wrong time anyway. So just use more traps. Somebody I noticed said, be careful, because some of those traps are big enough to attract a small bird, and it will catch them. If you make the trap properly, the bird can't get in. Make the trap properly and check it. Don't just leave it open, please.
I do use
they do work well.
I use them every year, and they still haven't had much of an impact.
Use more, Linda.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. So the other thing that is sometimes advocated is painting the bark of the tree with sticky stuff, but I just figure that traps a lot of other useful insects as well. That's
not for codling moth, that's for winter moth.
Ah.
So if you don't have winter moth, don't bother.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Sorry to cut you short there. Thank you. Fantastic. So the last speaker we've got, well, there's going to be 2 speakers, but we're going to start with Dinah Pryor from Seafood Environmental Alliance to tell us about an exciting project that is starting there. Dinah.
Right. I will start to share my screen, I hope. Lovely. I hope you can all see that. And it's very strange when I can't see anybody that I'm talking to, but it was a wonderful, we've just had 2 wonderful speakers. And of course, by now you've got, if you haven't had before, a lot of information. And what I'd like to do is to get you to participate in this to a certain extent. I want you, reason why it shouldn't happen in Lewes, to put aside at least a metre of their outdoor space for wildlife, hopefully more. And the idea was actually the idea and the initiative was that of Jean Cash, who I think actually has just left, one of the town councillors. And now it's being developed by C. So here we are. And I'm going to hand over at the end to Gemma, who will tell you a lot more about the actual project. So what we're hoping to do is together to create a mosaic, if you like, of stepping stones throughout the town so that wildlife can move around freely. And we need to obviously, therefore, provide a range of different habitats and food sources at different times of the year, shelter, nesting opportunities and water, just the sort of things that Martin and Leslie have so brilliantly shown you. But as I say, I'm aware that a lot of you don't need convincing about this, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here. And so I'm inviting you to actually, well, you might want to put questions, but maybe to put suggestions or just your name into the chat. And Jane is going to, if you like, we could have a, well, not exactly a discussion for a lot of people, but perhaps you can participate. And in particular, I'm asking you to think about how do we change the urban landscape for wildlife by persuading people in perhaps other areas, in Seaford, for instance, where we've got lots of manicured lawns, hard spaces, perhaps small backyards, and there perhaps some people are not prepared to leave places on what they think is untidy. So how do we change that mindset and perhaps their aesthetic appreciation of their gardens as well? So although we've been seeing these beautiful photos that Leslie and Martin have shown, and I think you probably all agree that it's absolutely lovely, but for some people, they'll just see long grass. And let's hope that we can, what we hope to do anyhow in Seaford, is begin to change that. And one of the ways, of course, is by showing photographs. And these photographs are going to be used for the project, and they've been taken by Judy Pepper. So we're very, very grateful for those, and many more to come. But this one here was actually taken by one of the teenagers who who I think is here, Lara. And I put it in partly because it's a fantastic photo of a roast chafer beetle and on a mayweed, I think. But it's also just perhaps reminds us to be curious about the small. And if we're talking about just a metre square, then we're looking at some of those very tiny creatures. So as a child, looking at things through the eyes of a child. And I hope that we can invite people in Seaford and beyond to do just that and be curious about it. So what we did, and Gemma will tell you more about the website because she and Simon have created this, but part of the advice is looking at different areas. So in Seaford, we've got a lot of different kinds of housing, many flats, many areas with very small outdoor spaces. And what we're saying is any of those spaces, you can find a metre square at least to think about wildlife. So I've taken these different areas and then tried to match them up to the kind of things that you can do. Now, I'm not going to laboriously go through everything because actually a lot of this already, Leslie and Martin have covered so well already. But just to say, in designing and thinking about wildlife, think about, you know, what's appropriate for what you have. So obviously you can plant a large pot or a window box. And these, again, thinking about the metre square, and you will actually map these metre squares throughout Seaford. So these are just, they may be little chains in a whole network throughout Seaford, and they are the feeding stations, the sources of nectar and pollen for, obviously, for the flying bumblebees, butterflies, hoverflies. And all you need to do in a small space is think about the different flowering plants that you can, you know, have perhaps early ones for right at the beginning of the year, later flowering plants. Think about things that you might enjoy too. So again, this has been said already, herbs which feed us, even flowering plants like nasturtiums and calendula. So in a small space, think about more than one thing that that these things provide. So I don't think I need to go any further than that to say that, again, on a hard surface or just a balcony, you can always hang a bird feeder. And goodness, the birds have been desperate over this last week, haven't they? And just thinking about where you might hang it. If you have got a tree or a shrub nearby, then that's a very good thing, because if you imagine you're a bird, you want something to fly back to. And it reminds me of when I was working at the Wildlife Trust. We had bird feeders, of course, just outside the kitchen window, and we had a record. And just as one of my colleagues was writing down a blue tit on the record sheet, a sparrowhawk came flying, darting straight through, took out the blue tit, and she just crossed out the blue tit and put sparrowhawk instead. So you're maybe feeding, you might be feeding more than you perhaps bargained for, but lovely to see that too. Yeah, another creature that might come and you may not want to feed is the squirrel, of course. And we've been having fun foiling the squirrels, as a lot of people do. Of course, you can buy special feeders for this. But we found that we've got a similar pole to this, and we found that just greasing it actually stops the squirrels, or they go about halfway up and then slide down in a rather and there's so much information on the RSPB site on what sort of seeds and foods you can put out for the birds. But don't forget water as well, of course. And we've been breaking the ice recently, as I'm sure everybody has, and finding the birds immediately come in. So any of these things can be done on hard surfaces in very small spaces. Then you may just have a tree, and this one actually is slightly diseased, sadly, but there's lots of things that you can do to enhance them. As a obviously they're wonderful for wildlife as it is, providing shelter and food, but you can also grow climbers up them and put bird boxes up. Here's the blue tit, and bird boxes and bat boxes. Bird boxes, you do need to be thinking about what side of the tree that you put it, making sure that they've got a direct route in to the without any obstacles in the way, and that it's sheltered from the prevailing winds. And again, lots of information on the various wildlife sites, but I'm sure you're aware that some birds have to have a place that they can land. So a robin won't be able to get into a round hole like that, but it has a rectangular entrance, so will a wren, and those again have to be put at appropriate distances. So think about where it is that you're going to put aside your place for wildlife. If you've only got a small area, is this appropriate for them? And bat boxes, those actually, once you put them up, you don't need to do anything. And in fact, you mustn't do anything, because bats are protected. Once you put it up, that's got to stay there. So, but again, it's a possibly, if you've got bats around, that's a very useful thing to be able to do. Another animal that does need or a bird that does need help at the moment is the swift. And if you've got swifts or had swifts in the area, then installing a swift brick hardly takes 50% of our swifts in a very short while. So they may not come back in they may not come to a new area, but they certainly may come back to an area that they've already visited. So swift bricks, thinking about installing those is a good idea. So, oops. And another area that you might have not even thought about is perhaps if you've just got a wall or a fence, and that one's looking pretty bleak at the moment, but there are climbers growing up it, and obviously you can put your bird box up there or a feeder, but also climbing plants, of course, are a great source of food for birds and insects. And one of those is the ivy. And at the moment, well, mostly they're just beginning to go over now, but the flowers are a wonderful source of nectar for the bees in the winter. So they're really, really nutritious. And then, of course, honeysuckles, different times of year. You've got honeysuckles at different times of year. And this is the sort of thing you need to be thinking about, is providing this whole range of food throughout the season. Pyrocanthus is another thing you can grow up a fence or a wall, and it gives beautiful berries, and it's also actually a great structure. It's very strong, great structure for birds to nest in. So these climbers provide nesting areas as well. So we've looked at very restricted areas on the, hard surfaces, but of course, some people have lawns, and I'm going to hand over at this stage to Gemma, because she has a little story about her lawn. So Gemma?
So a couple of years ago, I was cutting my grass, and a bumblebee flew down in front of me and landed on a bird's foot trefoil flower. So I stopped the lawnmower and I was watching him for a while, and then I just decided I'm not going to cut my grass anymore. So that was that. So I just noticed in the chat a lot of people are saying about signs. So I didn't want my neighbours to think we're lazy. So I made these signs, as you can see in the picture, the bees and butterflies. And I've got some here to show you, but you can't see me. Oh, can you see me? Okay. Well, if you can see me, this is the signs. I also made a hedgehog to go in there. And I hope this would encourage other people to think about their own gardens too. I also found a way, if you make it look intentional or neater, to mow around the edge, that helps. And also you could cut a path through the long grass. It's another way, so people don't think you're just leaving it. And I've been amazed to see the different plants already growing in the grass, which would usually be cut down. We've got clover and yarrow, which is good for beetles and lacewing, and knapweed attracts moths and hoverflies. Ribwort plantain, they're good for winter food for the birds. I've also been advised to sow seeds in pots for plants such as oxeye daisy and self-heal to add later in the year. And people have been saying about adding yellow rattle. Definitely going to try that this year. And another idea I've been given is to plant spring bulbs in there to extend the availability of nectar. And also, as Martin said, when you do cut the grass, important to rake off the cuttings after a few days. As the wildflowers grow best in poor soil. And also the raking scratches the surface of the soil, which allows the seeds to germinate. And I found that this small change saves me time and space, because we don't have to have a lawnmower in the shed. And it's also helped me to think about other ways to make our garden more nature friendly, and other things that we buy, such as food and cleaning products. So, I think I'm going to pass over to Diana again.
All right, thank you,
Okay.
Gemma. And we've had such a lot of information from both Martin and Leslie about all the sort of flowers that will grow, and some that you can possibly plant in as plug plants. So I think we'll go on from there. But again, coming back to the metre square, because what we're trying to do is to get people to think, well, what have I got in my garden that I could give over to wildlife? And it could just be a part of a flower bed, hopefully a bit more than a metre, but it could be that. And of course, here we've got a win-win situation. Colourful flowers, we like them, but if you grow the right ones, and Leslie in particular has been telling you all about the kind of open flowers that the pollinators like. So in this one, actually, I've grown in among the flowers, well, some edible flowers, but also lettuces and other vegetables as well. So I slightly mix things up as well. So thinking of the different sorts of flowers as well, think about early flowers, here the bluebell, and slightly later ones, perhaps with the verbena, and sedum too, which I think you can see here, and is still in the garden actually, because I haven't cut them down, because of course it is so important to keep the seed heads, but also stalks for other insects. Leaves make a great protection for the soil, but also for insectivores as well. So don't be too tidy. And again, that's something we might have to challenge people about, or try and change them. So maybe thinking of a small space first might be a way of doing it. And then for people to feel, well, actually, that's not too bad. That looks rather nice, and begin to change and enlarge it, and be a bit bolder about what they leave for wildlife or grow for wildlife. So obviously your flower bed as well is rich soil, so annuals it's very, very appropriate to grow annuals in that richer soil, whereas the perennials, as you've been hearing about, need much more impoverished soil. So you can't, obviously, these are unlikely to come up again, but actually what I've done is to collect all the seed and kept them in envelopes over the winter, and I will plant out somewhere else next year, so following year. So you also might be able to, in your flower bed or on your lawn, be able to dig a mini pond or bog area. We saw a fantastic photo of that, and lots of information on that, so I'm not going to go into that in great detail. The importance of not just having the water and what it's for, but also the marginal plants, and thinking about animals coming into it and getting out of it and not drowning, of course. So that's important too. And lots of information, by the way, again on websites as to what sort of plants. It's really worth having a look to see, especially in a small pond where you maybe have about 2 or 3 per square metre of water plants. You need to know which are the oxygenators. So you can get this information from the Sussex Wildlife Trust website, for instance. There's a lot of information on that. But some of the areas, or an area you might choose, is actually an area that isn't such a great area for anything else. It's shaded by trees or shrubs, and perhaps you can easily afford to give that over to wildlife. That's perhaps the first step, is to find an area that you wouldn't otherwise grow food in. There's lots of things that you can still do here in these areas too. So building a log pile or a bug hotel, again, both of the previous speakers have spoken about this, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail. It's a fantastic project for children, actually. I was thinking that, Gemma, your lawn with your wonderful animals, I think probably your lads helped you do that, and I think getting children involved is really important. And this log pile, where you have to be careful as you take it apart, but it's a great place for investigating some of those bugs. And the same with this one, with the little pieces of that bamboo, I think they are here. You'll have earwigs and things overwintering. So that's another thing that you can do under the shade of the trees. And lots of information. That was a wonderful look at the garden where the hedgehogs were in Cooksbridge. So I'm going to just go over this very quickly. Actually, we created earlier a hedgehog habitat, and I don't dare go and have a look whether we've got one, but yeah, it's very exciting if you do. And of course, they are such wonderful creatures to have in your garden in terms of both watching them and enjoying them, but also that they do eat some of the slugs and snails that I think every gardener worries about. So under the shade of the trees, you can also put your compost heap. It's not the obvious choice for your metre square, perhaps, but actually, as we know, it also attracts lots of wildlife. I think it's a slow worm. Yes, it's a slow worm in the right-hand side. If it's an open one, you'll have all sorts of animals foraging through the compost heap. So it's that not only takes your garden scraps, turns them into a wonderful mulch or compost, but will attract wildlife as well. And again, Leslie told us lots about that, so I won't go into that in detail. And then finally, don't forget that to give yourself time. I'm the worst at this, so I can say this, just to sit quietly and watch your metre square, if that's all you can put aside, and see what comes. Here's the a common blue on vetch, a photo that Judy Pepper took, and it's incredible what a very small space will attract. So, and we are going to, or Gemma's going to explain how the website is encouraging you to then record, or rather give information and share it with other people. But you can of course go on to iRecord, and perhaps I better put that the website on in the chat if people don't know. But and that's another way that you can contribute to the records, because it gives a very good idea of what, by encouraging wildlife, by just putting aside a very small area of your garden, and if you think you're not the only one, then you're providing food, you're providing habitat for wildlife that can then prosper in an urban setting. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Gemma to explain a bit more about the project.
Hello. So this is Jean's 1 metre square to wildlife project. So Jean came to a C meeting with this idea to encourage local people to donate space in their garden for wildlife. And after a discussion, it was decided we would produce a garden design template for children and adults to use their own wildlife garden features and to colour in. We also want people to pledge an amount of space in their garden, which we'll add to this virtual map, so we can see the wildlife corridors forming on the map. You can't really see it, there's little red dots. Eventually, we'll hope to see lines of the corridors on the map. Dinah's also wrote a page of advice that's on the website too, so for different aspects. So if you are unsure of any, go and have a look. So it's got a very clever code to work out what you need. We'd planned to hold a spring event where people could bring along their design, and we'd give out free wildflower seeds. As obviously this can't happen this spring, so we sent out a poster advertising the project to the local schools and to the residential homes as an activity for people to do at home. If we receive any of the garden designs back, we'll display them on our website for now, and then hopefully next year we can have the event. I think this project is such a lovely idea. It isn't just about the metre square, it also encourages people to think about the rest of the garden and other ways to improve things to benefit nature. So Jean's back now, so say thank you to Jean. I think this is a really lovely idea. It's captured a lot of people's imaginations. So, I'm going to hand over to Jane now for a discussion.
Thanks, Gemma. Wow, what an amazing idea and project, guys. So I'm just going to invite Dinah for a minute before we have a discussion. Dinah?
This Dinah?
Sorry, Dinah Morgan.
No, it's Jean first, and then at the end of C, it's me.
Okay, Jean first.
No, Dinah, do you want to?
Sorry, I meant it's the discussion first. It's the C for discussion.
All right, so there were a few people who were talking about signs. Gemma showed her brilliant ones that she's already created in her garden. And there were some other ideas for how maybe they could be used in a more coordinated way. There was Holly and Wendy had some ideas. Would you like to talk about any other ideas for signs that you thought might be good for the project?
Gemma, I just loved your, this is Wendy. Gemma, I just love your signs. They're terrific and exactly the sort of thing that I was thinking. So there's been a project mooted in Lewes for having signs that have QR codes on them. So you can tap your smartphone and you can get more information about the object where the QR code is. And I was thinking something like that would work really well for wildlife sites. So if you have a sign that shows a bug or a slowworm or a robin or whatever, you can find out first of all what the project is about. So having more wildflower spaces, and then you can also find out about the particular bug or bird or slowworm that features on the sign. Anyway, just an idea. I'm just generally in support of the meter square idea and having signs that recruit more people to the idea.
Thanks, Wendy. that sounds really great. Holly, did you want to add anything to that about signs?
Yeah, so I want to rewild I've got a patch in my drive that is just bare earth and grass. It really doesn't really do very much, which would be perfect for rewilding. And I just think if there was perhaps a sign that everybody who's part of the project could perhaps have up in their garden. I think quite a few people have mentioned in chat already this idea to try and help people get over this idea that it has to be mowed and it has to be kept tidy, and that actually I haven't neglected it. I'm actually doing this for a purpose, maybe with a quirky kind of tagline or something like that, you know, I'm being left to be rewilded or something like that. I think it would just give people and also advertise really that idea that I'm part of that, and it might encourage other people to be part of it as well, especially if it's in your out the front of your house where people walk past daily. So I think that would be a great idea, and there's loads of brilliant ideas, you know, whether they're made to look like the little bugs and the QR codes. I think it'd be just something really useful to have.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Yeah, lots of ideas. Dinah, did you have another idea about signs or advertising as well, Dinah Morgan? No, okay. Donna was the other person who was talking about signs. Donna, was there anything else you wanted to, if you are still here?
I am.
Oh,
hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I think it's a really fantastic idea, and I think, you know, because many of us have to sort of shift our idea of what gardening is. I know that I'm interested in wildlife gardening now, but most of the people that I know that garden, it would be like a big shift for them. So I think to advertise the fact that you're doing it deliberately for a reason, I think that's really vital, because otherwise, you know, neighbours might think, oh, look at the state of that and all the rest of it. I think to just be really proactive about it and have these coordinated signs, and also that just alone coordinates it, and you could get, you know, makers and artists on board and create something really lovely, and then give them out to people when they say they want to be part of the project. So it's sort of really good advertising, very visual.
Fantastic, thanks, Donna. Yeah, and Lindsay had some information about a blue campaign. Is Lindsay still here? Maybe not. Okay. And Helen as well was joining that discussion. Helen, you still here? Yeah, there's lots of people popping off now. Okay.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I just
sorry,
want to
yeah.
say, I suggested something about schools that I didn't realise you'd already done, so apologies about that.
Yeah, no worries. And Jenny? Jenny, would you like to add anything? Okay. All right. And Leslie, you mentioned something sign-wise that has happened through Wildflower, Lewes? You're still mute, Leslie.
Sorry about that. Not very good at this stuff. So as Wildflower Lewes, what we were doing is looking for a sign that would be useful for all the verges that were being treated as wildflower verges by highways, which are only cut and cleared in the autumn. And some of you will be aware that in October we planted out a huge number of plug plants provided by Wakehurst. And we wanted to make sure that they have signs on them. So I did actually put a couple of notices out on Facebook asking for ideas. And the majority of people were favouring either something a bit cutesy, like Pardon the Weeds, We're Feeding the Bees, which I don't think I can actually live with, to be honest, or Left for Wildlife. I quite like that, because it's simple and it's meaningful. So that we are tomorrow, we've got a Wildflower Lewes meeting and we'll talk about any other ideas that people have had, because we just need to agree a simple thing that everyone, I mean, it doesn't even have to be the same sign. Highways is keen that it is the same sign throughout. But their yellow flower, which is on verges at the moment, we've had a lot of, well, they've had a lot of people take them down. Probably because they're impeding parking on the verges.
Oh, thanks for that, Leslie. Yeah, okay. So there's lots of ideas sort of on the boil at the moment. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Dinah now to wrap up for us. Thanks, Dinah.
Hi there. Thank you all for staying longer than we thought. It's been so interesting, such wonderful ideas. I'd just like to go back to the beginning and say again that Sussex Wildlife has come up with this idea of 30% of land back to nature by 2030, whether that's a park, a farm, a metre square garden, part of your garden. And if we start now, in whatever way, if you have the time to get in touch with either Lewes Climate Hub or Seaford Environmental Alliance Hub and send pictures or say what you've done, we can promote this idea in posters and in windows, and we can get it to, you know, get a bit of traction. And it would be really, really great if this time next year we've already moved the percentage so that there's, you know, we can create a map and we can actually see how it's moving. And that would be really a positive thing we can do for the climate, and we can start now in spring. So that's all I wanted to say. And now I'm handing over to Gemma. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody. Yeah, Martin, Leslie, Dinah, Jane. Thanks to all of you. It's been really good, and thank you to everyone for sticking with us for so long. Just want to say our next webinar will be in March, and it's collaborating with the United Nations Association Climate and Oceans. It's entitled Celebrating the Sea, Challenges and Solutions for Our Blue Planet, and that'll be on the 18th of March at 7:30. The details on our website, and that's been arranged by Keith and Lara and Alex, so thanks to them, and we're looking forward to that. So that's all from us. So thanks a lot for coming and sticking with us for so long. I hope to see you again next time. Thank you.